Welcome to the Richmond Film Network podcast, your all-access pass to the world of independent cinema. Each week, we go beyond the credits and sit down with the creatives who turn vision into reality. Tune in weekly to find out who's on the RFN pod.
Hello and welcome to the RFN podcast. I'm Lisa Giles, and with me today are Meredith Lawder, director, and Elliot Blanchard, director of photography for the short film titled The Third, which made its world premiere at RFN Indie Fest on May 17th. Welcome, Meredith, who joins us from Los Angeles, and Elliot, who's in New York.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having us.
Hello, glad to be here.
And thank you again so much for giving Indie Fest the honor of world premiering your film with our audience in Richmond. Elliot, you were able to be there. Can you tell us what that was like, seeing an audience reaction for the first time?
It was great. And I was talking with you when I was down there. It was a great reaction, and it's also always nice to have, especially when you have a short, to have your short in a block with a lot of other good films. So it was a great reaction from the audience. And it was also wonderful for me as an audience member to be able to see the other pieces that were in the block as well.
Excellent. So this was, if I'm not mistaken, this was co-written by the two of you. Is that right?
So I think it was about maybe like a year and a half ago. So Elliot and I are in the same film collective in New York, and I've seen a lot of his work over the past couple of years. And he kind of came to me with this idea and wanted to develop something together. And I thought it was a really great experiment. And what I love about Elliot's films is they kind of have their own unique visual language. And he is so great at steeping the viewer in a particular mood and place. And that place is usually somewhere on the periphery of other places. And so he had this idea about these two people, both grieving their partner, but also coming to terms with that transitional space after a death. I think really reconfiguring what their own identity is in the aftermath of losing their partner. And so we kind of sat down and went back and forth on different drafts and ideas. And I think what was really so valuable at the end was we have very different styles, but it was really fun to be able to try to find something that was like a hybridization of both of our different viewpoints.
Yeah, that was actually one of my favorite things. One of the great things about the film group that we're in the New York film shop is that it's like a very collaborative space. Everybody's always working on something, which for me as a filmmaker is super exciting. Similar to Meredith, I had seen a lot of scripts and projects that Meredith had brought to the film shop. And then in addition to both of our projects, we just were interested in sort of the same types of stuff. We were reacting in sort of the same ways to projects that other filmmakers came in. And so the great thing about Film Shop is that it's very easy to just be like, hey, do you want to work on, a project together? Because everybody is so just kind of up for everything and always making projects. And so I'm really happy that I was able to be in a group like that, and happy to be working with Meredith. It was kind of a family affair, right? Because there were a lot of other Film Shop people on the crew. One of the actors, Adara, had been in my last film, and she's also in my next film. So it was like a summer day. So even though it was kind of a heavy topic, it was a very, very relaxed, very almost kind of like family atmosphere making the project, which was really nice.
The film's logline: on the one-year anniversary of their lover's death, two women confront their shared grief, fractured past, and the lingering presence of a man they loved in different ways. You mentioned they're dealing with grief, being in a throuple, and how each of them are dealing with that. I saw them in two very different places. Is that what I should have taken from it, or what you wanted an audience to take from it? That one is a little bit farther ahead than the other?
Yeah. And I think that the lingering question too is how much further ahead is she really? So the character Noah is presenting as having come to some sort of place of resolution, but again, still sort of lashing out. And in the way, of course, it's not that profound to say that grief manifests so differently with different people. But I think the idea is that we wanted one character that she presents as having moved a little bit further along in the healing process. But I guess, of course, the question is, has she really? Um,
Yeah,
and
for sure. It's very important for Noah, for everybody to know that she's totally over it. Yeah, whether she is or not is something that we kind of um, hopefully get into in the film a little bit. Sort of like how they're both processing it and how they want it to appear to other people, and most importantly to each other, how they're sort of processing everything that's happened in the last year. And I think that we were very lucky that we had really good actors who could take, it's a very small piece. Um, they both, Sierra, who played Noah, and Emily, who played Adara, really could pack a lot into this sort of small piece in terms of um, the larger thing of where sort of their characters were coming from and kind of where they were at and kind of where they thought they were going forward from this point.
and I think what really struck me as an interesting idea to explore when Elliot presented this idea is what happens, and this happens in so many different types of relationships, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be romantic, but sometimes there are dynamics that really only work in a particular formation, right? So, and I think that the overall idea here is that maybe as a throuple, Alan, Adara, and Noah were able to have a very fulfilling relationship, although, of course, there's this underlying, ambiguity around his death and what may have led to it. But um, the idea being that something happened when he died that their relationship couldn't really survive in the same way. And that sometimes, what may work as two doesn't always work as three, and sometimes what works as three doesn't always work as two. So I thought that was such an interesting thing to explore. And I have a lot of friends and acquaintances who are involved in polyamorous relationships or who have had experiences being like the third person in a couple. And I think that this is a kind of relationship that is becoming more mainstreamed in a way, and that I can imagine, not that I can imagine, but that, talking to different friends, there are these really new kinds of experiences that are arising in a way from these kinds of relationships when you have more than one person that you're navigating. And so I think there was also that aspect of it that felt really interesting to explore. And what happens when all of a sudden it's not that they choose to end a relationship, but that death intervenes.
Yeah, totally.
So, in developing the story in the writing phase, how did you decide that it would be Ilan that dies and not one of the women?
Elliot.
That's a good question. How did we decide that? I feel like he was always a goner. Was he ever?
I think he was a goner. Maybe that's an interesting idea. I don't know that we necessarily really challenged that. I think, well, I think personally, I thought that there was something really interesting in having two women navigate their sort of relationship. And, it's a queer relationship too. And I sort of almost, I think like this idea of, of course he's a part of the equation. And
Yeah.
he's formative to the relationship together. But I really thought that it would be a lot richer in a way to see how the two of them might be able to navigate something like that.
Yeah. It's funny, now that we're talking about it, I didn't, it's like, I don't even feel, I mean, he's definitely dead, but like, I don't even feel like in a dramatic way, almost, he's not dead to the story because he's still, even in his absence, is sort of involved in sort of the two of them trying to figure out how they're going to move forward and everything. And I guess that goes back to the title of the movie, is that he's not there, but he's still sort of a piece in the ongoing story of their life. And then in the sense of the film too, we got that great voiceover as well to kick it off, which I think was is another friend of ours, and I think he really did like a fantastic job, kind of like of setting the table for our two lead actors to kind of come in and really be able to dive in there and do good work for a few minutes.
Now, we don't know until the very end, and unless we watch the credits, that Ilan there's a photograph and then there's the voice. They're two different actors. So how did that choice come about? Because I thought that was interesting to have the visual representation of Ilan and then the voice, what we hear.
Ooh, that's a good question. In the beginning, the voicemail message was much shorter. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's a very short voicemail message. And I think when we workshopped this film with a film group, that some of the feedback that we got was that it would be interesting to hear more from him in this. And so I think when we did that, Meredith, tell me if this is right or not, but we realized that another person in our film group was like perfect for bringing that kind
Yeah,
of energy.
I
Yeah.
think so. This actor, Mike Sparra, who is a wonderful actor and has a great voice and great range. And as we were rewriting some of it, we really wanted the voicemail to be a little bit more languorous in the same way, because we were going to overlay it on the river. And I think having known Mike, we knew he could give something a little bit more haunting. In reading that character and just really delivering something a bit more ghost-like than we had previously thought. So it was kind of an experiment. I don't know that we were as particular about it being a narrative or a creative decision to have two different actors. It kind of just ended up working out like that. But I will say that I'm interested to see how people respond to it, but I think it does create a little sense of disjointedness, and I think that can be sort of a helpful, effective addition to the piece.
And it's funny because I was wondering about it too. And I don't know if I told you this, Meredith, but Mike recorded the VO in my basement. And I knew it was going to work out when we were doing some takes. And then my wife like comes down and she's like, "What are you guys doing?" She's like, "This sounds so amazing." And I was like, "Okay, we're on the right track." Mike's just so good at packing so much into like a very, because the voicemail. I think it's short, but it's kind of a tough assignment because it's short in sort of setting. Because we have these visuals of, it's like the East River, and we're going over the Roosevelt Island cable car. So that, like that's setting the scene a little bit, but it's really that voicemail that kind of like brings you, I hope, into this sort of the world of the film, the kind of the vibe that we're looking for. And it's like only a few seconds. So we just knew from knowing him for quite a while at this point that he is the master at sort of packing a lot into just like a very small amount of time.
Speaking of the setting, Roosevelt Island at night, when the story was coming together, did you know that's where it was going to be? And if so, if having that on the page and then actually shooting there and creating that mood that's so important, was all of that intentional, or did it just kind of happen, or did you get what you intended to get when you were writing this?
Man, we looked all over the city, right, for the location.
I feel like I may have inadvertently directed us there, because we had a couple of different places that we were thinking about. And I was living in Queens, not far from Gantry Park. I was like, Gantry Park is really beautiful. And then, I think we were talking about it. We're like, well, what about Roosevelt Island? I think too, it's a city within a city, um,
Hmm.
and its own ecosystem. And there are also just so many beautiful parts to it. And
Hmm.
I think too, it's also like you are able to enjoy the river in a way that you might not be able to throughout the rest of New York, whether it's in Manhattan or in Queens or in Brooklyn. There's something because it's situated right in the middle that feels a little bit out of time.
Hmm. Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. Yeah,
And
the
so
island itself is in between.
right. Yeah, right. It's very interstitial. So I think that maybe I had suggested it, and then Elliot, I feel like you went to do a maybe like a location scout, and you're like, yeah, this is perfect. And so um, we ended up kind of just doing it, and because we weren't completely handheld. The parks, New York City parks, technically the rules were it's fine to not have a permit if it's handheld. Telling on ourselves. Um, but no, we didn't end up having any issues. They're pretty nice. Actually, shooting in New York is not as difficult as it might seem at first, just in general.
Shooting on the street is good. Although the funny thing was, I guess there's also there ended up being a little Easter egg because the thing we're looking at like, on the other side of the river for the whole movie is a hospital's emergency room. It's I think special surgery's emergency room on the other side of the river. It's actually kind of funny because shooting in New York was great. It was hard for us to keep the vibe though. You remember on the weekend, we're trying to do this sort of wistful piece, and like every 5 minutes a weekend party boat would sail by, blasting party music, so we would have to like stop and everybody get back in kind of their like mood and then go again, and then there'd be another party boat. New York is a great place to shoot. It is also a very noisy place to shoot, so it's
Yeah,
just part of shooting in town.
That's amazing, especially that opening shot. I mean, the whole thing, but it's stunning. It's absolutely stunning. The lights. I mean, even
that
the
was it.
cars coming across the bridge, and they just the way they twinkle, and oh, it's just beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's also a side of New York that I don't always necessarily see represented in film because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there are so many images that we're really used to. And I think also the way that Elliot shot it and the lighting, it added something uh again, really quite different mood wise to a side of New York that I again I don't know that I've really seen.
We actually shot on vintage lenses from the 70s to try and get a little bit of that sort of like timelessness. Um, because Roosevelt Island itself was really built up a lot in the 70s. So I kind of tried to, I actually had to look all over for those lenses to try and kind of capture that, a little bit of that timelessness, or try to visually as well.
I was going to ask you what were some of the choices that you made, framing, lighting, movement, even hair and makeup and wardrobe to also aid in the storytelling.
We shot on those vintage lenses to kind of give it that timeless look. The lighting package was actually very simple. We used a couple of paper lanterns that it was good because it gave a very sort of soft light that the actors could sort of feel comfortable. They had a little bit of a safety margin to move around in so they could act naturally as well. It's a little challenging. It was a beautiful place to shoot. It's a little challenging because the lights on the walkway that you can see in the background behind both the actors are this very harsh, sort of like park-like glare. So we actually had to find this row of sort of mature trees that were planted by the river that we shot in between so that you could kind of see the lights in the background, but the trees were kind of blocking the actual light from the lights from sort of interfering with the soft lighting we were setting up. So I think I like walked for like 3 or 4 miles up and down to find that like little spot where we could have kind of a little pocket to sort of set up our own lighting as well. Um, and yeah, we thought about, do you want to talk about the makeup and the wardrobe, Meredith?
Yeah, I mean, I think the effect was to go for something very natural. And as for wardrobe, the idea behind their meeting was that it was a year afterwards, but it wasn't necessarily memorial. I mean, really, they're coming together to really close out their own relationship with each other and also
Mhm.
their relationship with Alon. Um, but at the same time, there is something casual and more relaxed about it. And I think that's also to kind of communicate that they still have some sort of relaxed experience with each other. And there's a lot of
Mhm.
intimacy. They're not necessarily like how you might go when you see an ex, like you dress up, you make, I don't know, you're wearing your best outfit. There's something that's still between the two of them a bit more demure, for lack of a better word. And I actually think even Emily may have worn my shirt.
Oh, that's right, she did.
Yeah, I think that we also didn't necessarily want to overpower the scene with anything too outlandish makeup or wardrobe wise.
Mhm. Well, and I think the actors that like the two actors themselves bring like a very they both bring like a very strong visual presence, and it's different, which is why they were great in this scene together, because they both have very interesting energy on the screen, and it's a different energy. And so it's like when you're putting them in this little piece, right next to each other in the frame, you get this really interesting kind of like mix of like visual and sort of personality vibes, which that's when you get that kind of mixing happening, that it makes it something that's interesting to watch.
Even the music is subtle but powerful. There's power in that subtlety. Can you talk about that music choice and that sound choice?
Elliot.
We worked pretty carefully with the sound designer on that because we did want to have something that was ambient and kind of had an emotional resonance, but was not kind of telling you what you should feel. It
Hmm.
was kind of setting the stage. I saw it as kind of a subtle soundtrack, but it had strength, and it's almost to me a little bit like it's a personification of the river, which is this very strong tidal. The Hudson's like a very strong tidal river. It goes one way for half the day. I'm from Washington, D.C., and it's the same thing with the Potomac. It looks calm, but there's a lot of sort of going on underneath it and a lot of power going on underneath it. And I almost felt like the music was kind of the personification of that. But Meredith, tell me if you agree. But we wanted to be like very careful not to get in the way of the actors and have it be really about what they were creating with each other in this scene.
Yeah, I think immediately, as we were looking back at footage, we both thought about ambient music. Like Elliot was saying, it's difficult to find something that's not necessarily going to be prescriptive. And I think that there are many different ways to go with tone that a different piece might have suggested. I kind of left the music side of things to Elliot, but I think he, was able to pick something that really let everything else breathe and carry the story kind of softly through.
Obviously, you do a film, there's a lot of planning, you think about it a lot. But like once we got into it on the shoot, I just felt like it was very important. Like if it was going to work, that everything kind of get out of the way of what you, Meredith, were like trying to do with like Emily and Sierra. And that was the key to just kind of clearing the table for like the work that you were doing with the two actors so that their work could hopefully shine.
The film feels very personal. Was there anything autobiographical or emotionally resonant from either of your own lives that found its way into the script?
Um,
Or was it totally an experiment?
in a lot of ways, it was really an experiment. And I think there were times when I think it's hard. I'm like, I don't know if I can best serve this story necessarily. Like I having not really been in a polyamorous or a queer relationship. And I think that to some extent, I'd be curious to see what like another filmmaker would sort of do in this way. And I think also there's something too that it can extrapolate to other kinds of relationships. There's a lot about, I mean, of course, with grief and then closing a chapter with a person in your life.
Yeah.
I think that, of course, that is something that is emotionally resonant and something that I have navigated many times over. And that makes me sound toxic. I am not toxic. But, of course, there are times in life where a person either falls a little bit away or we have a more distinct before and after. And in this instance, it's almost like there are almost many different kinds of relationships that are coming to an end here. There's the one that all three of them had together. And there's the one between both Azara and Noah, after they really tried to make it work. And then, of course, the relationships that we don't necessarily get to see are the ones between Adara and Alan and Noah and Alan. And just within that, there are so many different dynamics. And I think that, going through life is just going through those dynamics over and over and over again. And so I think in terms of navigating beginnings and ends, for sure, that was really resonant.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's less about sort of the specificity to our experience and more like that we were trying to kind of get everybody has this thing where you do something, you have a relationship and it doesn't work out, but then it's kind of like, well, what happens after that? Like, how do you sort of figure out the terms on which you're going to kind of go on and keep living your life? And that's, I think, hopefully something that people can resonate with in their experience. I think I said in the question and answer that, there's a lot of films about people falling in love, and there's a lot of films about people breaking up and they either get back together or they really hate each other. And so one of the things we wanted to do is, well, what kind of happens when none of those things happen? When a relationship ends, they're definitely not getting back together, but they're trying to figure out how they're going to go forward, hopefully with, a lot of respect for each other.
Yeah. And I think there is some resolution that we're at least trying to allude to. And it's not that things are solved or, again, that they're going to get back together or that they're even going to maintain any kind of a friendship. But I think also in terms of any kind of relationship, but specifically romantic, you don't always have these moments where, again, it can be so messy and maybe the goodbye moment that you have is not the goodbye moment that you expected. But I think that in this scene, there is an opportunity for that. And I think that because it's not always something that you get in real life, like, again, this elusive term closure, it to me seems like a happy ending because there's a real maturity and also acknowledging and placing something in its own context, appreciating it for what it is, and then letting it kind of go.
Yeah. Yeah. They kind of end in a good place because at the beginning of the film, Noah is definitely trying to push Adara's buttons a little bit. And they managed to kind of like both turn that around into like a more respectful place.
In taking this experiment, were there any discoveries or moments of surprise along the journey that happened that maybe you didn't expect, either with the story or with the actors?
Yeah, I think that the story kept evolving. And even in the edit, of course, I mean, I think that's probably happens with so many films, but there were certain moments or jokes or scenes that I was like, oh, this feels like this really works on page. And then just it does not work in the edit. And there's a real lesson always in something like that too, where definitely doing a lot of table reads, but I just sometimes it doesn't something doesn't quite translate the way that you think it's going to until you really like sit down to chop it up. But I mean, we shot
Um,
at night and we were trying to find bathrooms for everybody, so that was like a big thing.
that's one of the drawbacks of Rosebud Island in the middle of the night. I mean, I think it wasn't like it changed in terms of things went in a totally different direction. But I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think for me, where there's, even if the project kind of keeps on going like you expected it to, at least for me, where there's a real change in perception is when, if you know you're lucky enough to have good actors, which we were, when they start coming into these characters that you've just sort of been, we've like meeting at the coffee shops and writing on our laptops, which is sort of a cerebral thing. And then when the actors come and they really start to like inhabit these characters that were just sort of sitting in a document on your laptop, and then it's like that sort of strange and magical moment where they're suddenly like real people and you sort of see your own characters in a totally different way. And we kind of had that twice because we had it when Sierra and Emily came in to play Noah and Adara, and then later when Mike came in. And it's sort of, I don't know if any of those really changed the trajectory, but it's sort of, as a filmmaker, it really changes your relationship with the characters when these other artists that you respect come into the process as well.
Yeah, right. There's a real evolution of story and character that takes place. And I think allowing for that is so crucial, and still trying to find something of what you were intending in the first place. I mean, hybridization maybe is like the sort of strange term that we keep coming back to. But yeah, okay. It's a process too that I think was really great for us to be a part of and to involve everyone in, and talking to different actors. There's not always space sometimes with certain characters that they work with to really shape it necessarily, or work with the writers and the directors in a way where, like, hey, if we did this, I feel like this doesn't make sense for her character, or and I think we were both really open to that process, and it makes you really a better writer and filmmaker also, because you're like, this doesn't work, you're right.
So the third is just now starting its festival journey. But if I know creative people, you're probably working on something new already. So can you give us a hint at what's next for each of you?
Elliot, you want to go first?
I was going to say, you can go first. Uh,
Well, you're talking now, so.
Okay, I'll go first. So I guess the link is that my next piece, which is, I'm going to say it out loud to manifest it, is just about done with VFX and about to head into color and sound. The Visitor actually stars Emily again, who was Adara in the film. So it's been great to work with her again. She's playing a very different character, and it's a very different piece, also shot in New York. And I'm hoping, fingers crossed, to finish that up in the next few weeks. And I'm definitely very excited about that. It's more of a kind of, I guess you could say it's a little bit of a creepy, sort of wistful piece about kind of identity and sort of being confronted with yourself and sort of where you are in life. And we shot it in this beautiful old mansion up in the Bronx over the course of a weekend. And I'm really excited about getting that out to color and sound. I'll probably actually work with the same composer that I did on the third as well. So yeah, I've been kind of picking away at that, and it's starting to come together. And then Meredith, yours is the one that I think it was the script that I was like, oh my God, Meredith is so cool when I read the script in Film Shop, right?
The one that I know. Yes, I did just shoot that one recently. I guess this was April. I shot a short from a script that Elliot and the other members of our group read and helped immensely with. But it's about a young woman navigating chronic illness, and essentially she is unable to access her meds, and it's a little bit of an Odyssean journey across the course of a day for her to not completely go into withdrawal and to also not lose her job or her friends. So it's about emerging from the other side or from a descent into madness. But the idea, sort of the core idea, was it's a dark comedy, but it's also a little bit unsettling. And the chronic illness is supposed to be something that could be widely applicable to a lot of different illnesses, but there's a real grotesque element to it. But yeah, so we shot it over 3 days in New York last month. So we're in the post-production process. I have a great editor that I'm going to be working with, and I need to find some post money. So once that happens, I'll again, a really great team, a lot of folks from our collective and new collaborators were really amazing. And so I'm excited to see what happens. But yeah, I think, again, a departure from this last one. But I think a lot of the same, existential elements, but maybe a little bit like, well, I don't know if it's really that much lighter.
We're
Maybe
both
a
back
little
to
bit
being
more
weird again.
absurd. It's weird, but there's a little bit, there's like a whole Cinnabon plot line, so it's, there's maybe a little bit more poking fun at itself.
Well, Meredith and Elliot, this has been great fun. Can you tell our viewers how they can find you and follow your work?
Sure. Elliot. I'll go, whatever. Okay.
You go first. I have to look up my account name. I always forget.
We're both really not that good. No, actually, no. Elliot is much better than me on social media. I'm on Instagram at Merediche. So that's Merediche. And I'm working with my friend to hopefully get my site launched soon, but it'll just be my first and last name.com. So you can look out for that. But yeah. And then Elliot, I know your handle.
I looked it up. So I mainly do Instagram because I can only manage one thing. And also it's good. I found a lot of other really great filmmakers and actors on Instagram. So my Instagram is Elliot Blanchard, ELLIOTBLANCHARD. And after I got yelled at by another artist friend of mine, I do provide regular updates on how everything is coming together as kind of I work on stuff. Actually, Instagram's really good there's a lot of good. That's actually one of the nice things about going to wonderful festivals such as yourself, is that you get plugged in with everybody that you saw, the actors and the directors. I'm plugged in with like basically the entire crew of that post-apocalyptic Richmond movie.
Love it.
And they are prolific posters. So I feel like I'm part of the Richmond film scene now by association. But yeah, that is where I post all of my stuff.
Outstanding. Thank you guys both so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
That's a wrap for this episode of the Richmond Film Network podcast. Thanks to our guest and to you, our listeners, for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, and share. Tune in next week to see who's on the RFN pod. Until then, keep the cameras rolling.